There is a certain comfort in the sound of a school after hours. The hum of distant chatter fades, the hallways fall silent, and the only echoes are of a broom sweeping the floor or the faint squeak of a mop bucket's wheels. For Mr. Harold Greene, that quiet was his favorite part of the day. At 62, Harold had been working as a janitor at Maplewood High for over 2 decades. He wasn't the type to stand out. His clothes were simple, his cap always a little too worn, and his face weathered by years of honest work. The students liked him, though. Harold had a kind smile and a knack for remembering names. He'd stop to chat if he saw a kid sitting alone or crack a small joke as he swept by a classroom. But for the most part, Harold kept to himself, blending into the backdrop of the bustling school. No one knew much about his personal life, and no one suspected the incredible secret he carried. It started years ago when Harold overheard a conversation between 2 students in the cafeteria. "I can't afford the field trip," one of them said quietly. "My mom says we're already behind on lunch payments." Harold paused mid-sweep, pretending not to listen, but those words stuck with him. He'd seen the look of embarrassment on that student's face before. It was a look he knew all too well. Harold had grown up poor, often going to bed hungry, or pretending he didn't care when he couldn't afford what the other kids had. He remembered the shame, the helplessness, and in that moment he decided to do something about it. That evening, Harold stopped by the school office on his way out. He approached Mrs. Lee, the school secretary, with a quiet request. "Can you tell me how much that student owes for lunches?" he asked. Rubbing the brim of his cap nervously, Mrs. Lee raised an eyebrow. "Why do you want to know, Harold?" "I'd like to pay it off," he said simply. Mrs. Lee hesitated, but eventually nodded. She pulled up the account and told him the amount. It wasn't much, just a few dollars, but Harold handed her the cash without a second thought. And that was how it began. Over the years, Harold kept an ear out for stories like that. A student struggling to pay for lunch, another unable to afford a cap and gown for graduation, a family behind on school fees. Whenever he heard about a need, he quietly stepped in. He never wanted recognition. He never told anyone what he was doing. Harold lived modestly. His 1-bedroom apartment was small, and his truck was older than some of the teachers at the school, but he didn't mind. Every spare dollar he had went toward helping the kids. Kids shouldn't have to worry about money, he often thought to himself. They've got enough on their plate. The years went by, and Harold's quiet generosity continued unnoticed. But secrets like his don't stay hidden forever. One day, a graduating senior named Cindy visited the principal's office to thank someone for paying off her overdue lunch balance. She'd struggled for years, often skipping meals out of fear of being embarrassed. Now, as she prepared to graduate, she wanted to know who had helped her. The principal was as curious as Cindy. Together, they dug into the school's records, tracing the payments back to an anonymous donor. It took some time, but eventually the truth came out. Harold Greene, the janitor. Word spread quickly. Teachers whispered about it in the staff room. Parents started asking questions. And the students? They were in awe. One Friday morning, the principal called an assembly. Harold had no idea what was going on. He thought he was there to set up chairs, as usual. Instead, he found himself standing in front of the entire school, the principal's arm around his shoulder. "Today we want to recognize someone who has quietly made a difference in all of our lives," the principal began. Harold's heart sank. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight. As the principal shared Harold's story, gasps filled the room. Students began clapping, then cheering, then standing on their feet. Harold's face turned bright red. "I didn't do it for this," he mumbled. Cindy stepped forward, holding a bouquet of flowers. "Mr. Greene," she said, her voice shaking, "because of you, I never gave up. You made me believe that someone cared. Thank you." After the assembly, Harold became the talk of the town. Local news stations picked up the story, and people began stopping him on the street to thank him. He didn't know what to say. But the biggest surprise came a few weeks later. The community had started a fundraiser to honor Harold's kindness. The goal was simple: to pay off every student debt in the district. Donations poured in, raising more money than anyone expected. The school even renamed their annual scholarship fund after Harold, ensuring that his legacy would live on. Harold still worked at the school, still wore his worn cap and swept the floors with the same quiet determination. But now he couldn't walk down a hallway without hearing a "Thank you, Mr. Greene." To Harold it was never about the recognition. It was about the kids. And in his own quiet way, he'd reminded an entire community of the power of kindness and what it means to truly care.